Oh, that's
It was
pretty cool.
hexadecimal. Yeah, it's all in hex too, so I had to like fix that up.
Oh wow. So how do you even work with hexadecimal?
They had a chart for certain characters because they noticed like, oh, this is for this character, and I'm guessing because they had mods for it, and it's like, oh, so I'm guessing that's associated. And I would check certain characters because there are certain events in the game that the game will literally just drag you to do it. It's like they gave you the no option, but they will actually make you do it. So I know when people aren't available because the game won't because story has to be involved in it. So it's just
Yeah.
like so I actually know like there's a because you have to do exams. Yes, you have to do exams, and
You have to
yes,
do
you have to take
exams.
yes, you do. They actually have lectures because this is in high school, so it's like, okay. Like they actually teach you things like, oh yeah, what's one BC? What type of meat that's actually related to this category? What's the scientific term of brain freeze? Yes, I was asked that on the spot. I actually got
Wow.
points for it.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
Persona 4, ladies and gentlemen.
And they
Oh
actually
my god.
in the exam. They are written in the exam. I had to select to make sure I wasn't wrong, or otherwise I would actually lose points. And also, that's not good. But
So what happens what happens if you fail the exam?
you
Do you
have to rank
virtually just get
remedial school.
expelled?
Remedial school. You have to go to
Oh.
you have to take care of another course.
Oh man. That's tough.
It's not fun.
I, I, I I've done none of that enough of that in real life. Like
The
you
game is
know.
easy. They're very generous. Like I just looked up guides for that because in exams you don't have any people to hang out with because exams, but you can study with people, and that actually helps them like hang out with you more. So it's like, it's just like high school, I suppose.
Ah, okay, yeah. I
Yeah,
see.
Persona 4, as far as I've seen, very complicated story.
and it's a whole year cycle. You're only there for a year. You have to take care of hang out with people, fishing, also dealing with your crops, and fighting a bunch of shadows. So yeah.
Wait, so on top of
Ah,
taking
yes.
exams, you have to deal with crops?
Fishing is optional, like just straight up just telling you that right now. It's obviously an optional fucking thing.
Okay,
Um,
what kind of jack of all trades is this main character? Like what?
well, you have to also get stats. Like one of them is knowledge, courage. Courage, you have to eat
Okay.
moldy food. Don't do that. Do
Oh.
not do that. Yeah,
Yikes.
but yeah, it's a really weird game. It's from like you can buy it on Steam. It's like $20. Surprisingly, it's really good for what it is.
Well, my buddy has Persona 5, but I never really knew what it was about. Like the most Persona that I've like seen in my life was just from Super Smash Bros. So,
Fair. Yeah. The one is from
yeah.
Golden. It's from a different place where it's like so basically you live in a kind of like it's not an isolated town, but it's a small town. And because you have to move because your family, both your parents are like working overseas, but they can't take you, which is fair. So you live in this small town, and weird stuff has happened. It's not a spoiler. Literally, you can see this in the first hour of the game. When you the first day of school, a body is found.
Oh.
So
Oh,
the first thing you
Well,
okay,
that's fun.
first day of school, someone has
Wow.
died.
this is on face of school. Someone has also died, and you
Yeah.
actually met this person too, which is creepy.
Amazing. That's gonna be very good on the noggin when you have to learn.
Yeah, it's a fun game, $20. Although be careful, it's really beefy on your PC.
Ah, that's okay. I went to town 2 summers ago and just beefed up my hardware, so I should
That's
be good for at least I don't know a couple years. Although apparently a lot of next gen games are like really crazy to run. So
oh no, this is an old one. It's 2012. This game is
yeah,
old.
yeah. 2012 is like that's baby food,
Yeah, that's
but
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 then again, my hardware,
yeah.
some of my hardware might be too old to run Persona.
yeah. You can just watch a playthrough. I don't know. That's all I remember.
Yeah, imagine
So
trying to play Persona 4 on, oh, I don't know, a Windows 7 PC that was designed originally for Windows XP.
Sorry, I shouldn't be laughing.
1 second. I'm just gonna
Yeah, I see that.
send out like a club news thing just so people know that we're getting started.
Mhm.
Uh, let's see. Hey everyone, we are gathering those dang requirements. Come on out. Hashtag project FOOBAR.
Looks like we got Andrew here. Welcome.
Hey folks, how are you doing?
Oh, hey, Andrew.
Hi.
Absolutely
well.
fantastic.
Good to hear. Is that Ness? I just heard. No,
Oh,
she's not here. Oh.
Hmm.
Hey, and is Kevin Brown here too?
Yeah.
I think he's on his way. I saw him join the server.
Cool.
I'm not sure if we can-
By the way, this is being recorded because there are people who definitely have scheduling conflicts, and for future reference, if anyone needs. Hope everyone will be fine with that.
Sounds good to me.
And we will be posting this to YouTube, and then we'll also embed that on the TND website for easy access.
Okay, that sounds fine.
Nice.
All right, so I figure we'll just give folks a couple minutes and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool.
Alrighty.
I like how it's all in caps. That's what we got.
You gotta get the crowd excited, you know?
Fair.
Let's see.
How was everybody's day?
Doing all right. And you?
Very, very busy, but good.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I spent the day doing normal software stuff, and then I went out and I looked for salamanders and turtles and frogs, and then I came back in and did more software stuff. That's been my day.
Do you live like right by like a ravine or something, or like a creek?
Yes, actually, I live literally next door to a creek. I have a creek about 7 to 10 feet off my door.
Oh,
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Did
Yeah,
you find
yeah,
any
really.
salamanders or turtles?
I didn't find any salamanders. I was glad I didn't find any turtles because there's like work being done on the area next to me, and I was afraid to find a dead one. I saw some frogs, but yeah, they're not too exciting. I could hear lots of frogs, lots of birds. They're all eating the frogs. But,
Oh God.
yeah. Lots
Well,
of bugs.
cycle of life, you know.
Yeah. So that was my day. It was a nice day.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm kind of jealous that I don't have a creek near my place, so I can go and find some frogs and salamanders and turtles and stuff. It's pretty
My
cool.
my first time. I've only lived here about a year. I like it. It's nice.
Oh, okay. So, are you like around the Hamilton area?
Yeah, I'm in Dundas right now. I lived in the core for over a decade, just
Oh,
right downtown.
okay, yeah. So you're probably near like the conservatory over there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice place. I like to go on walks over there. Get the legs all going.
Yeah, I like that a lot too.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we got Kevin Brown, the superstar. How are you?
Hey, Kevin.
How's it
Sorry,
going?
Andrew, you're a superstar as well. I did say that to you.
That's okay. I'll do my best. And I think somebody asked me. Yeah, I do know Kevin. I know him pretty well. So,
Yeah,
Kevin and I are friends.
sweet. All right.
All right.
Okay, so I guess it looks like we have pretty much everyone here. I guess we can get started.
Yep, absolutely. So just give me just 1 second. I'll start my screen, and then I was thinking today I would take you folks through how we do requirements at the company I work for, and what I've learned over the years about doing them, and then we would kind of go from there into talking about your project with Kevin, and maybe even starting to write some things out. I've got a template together that you can use, edit, own. It's yours, and go from there with. Does that sound okay?
That's perfect.
Cool.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen. So just so I know who I'm talking to, I imagine it's going to be different across the room, but like, who here is working in a software company right now? Who here is brand new to software? Are there people all over the place? Is it hard to say?
In between college and looking for work.
Same here.
Okay.
Well, not college work. I'm just studying, but still.
Okay, fair enough. Oh, and my theme is called spooky requirements. So,
Whoa.
Oh my god.
so spooky.
Halloween came early.
Yeah, it
When's
did.
Halloween? Oh, I guess
Very timely.
Today's not Halloween.
I'm a few months late. All right, but I call them spooky requirements because requirements are actually one of the scariest and hardest things to do in my experience in software. Oh, and by the way, so a couple things to know about me. Yeah, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Andrew. I work for a company called Weaver, co-founder, and we've done. I think when we were getting started as company, really more before we even became a company. I think we made almost every mistake that you could make in terms of writing requirements, creating requirements, designing, you name it. I probably have done it incorrectly at some point. Today, I'm happy to say that we're a pretty successful company. Our products are used by some of the biggest consumer manufacturing companies in the world, Unilever, Mars, some other ones after that. I would say I've successfully designed about 20 products in my career, and I've probably misdesigned or botched about 70 products. So when I speak in terms of making lots of mistakes, I mean a lot of mistakes. But the important part is that we try to learn from them. Any questions about me? Anything there? Cool. Okay. So let's talk about and everyone can see my screen, by the way, right? Everyone's good?
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. All right, recs and specs. So requirements are the why. So they're the outcome. And whether you're learning how to pitch for investment or you're looking to get at like what the real goal of something is, there's a great question that you can just ask over and over. And that question is so what? Because that so what part really leads you to the outcome of what you're trying to build for somebody. So the first thing I want to get across is requirements aren't how it should look or how it should work. Requirements are what the outcome or goal is for other people. Can I get a volunteering Kevin Brown for a second? Kevin, you there?
Yes.
All right, let's play the requirements game. Kevin, name something you did.
Made a course.
Well, why? So what? Why did you do that? Why did you do that?
To teach students C programming.
Okay, but like, so what? Why do you care about teaching students C programming?
So that they can work as systems programmers.
Okay, but why do you care about that?
Because when students get jobs, that creates work for professors. And so that's a good thing for me because then I get money from students that pay tuition because they're happy to because they get jobs. So I guess that's the whole trail.
So you would measure success by your students having jobs?
Yes.
Not by whether or not you created a course?
Yes. I would say that's the underlying value, yes.
So that's the requirements game right there in a nutshell. It's about what you get out of doing the thing, what the person's real goal is. So you don't put on shoes because your goal is to put on shoes, or your goal might be to make your feet warm. It might be to protect your feet if you're going walking in a creek. It might be to go for a long run. It might be to get exercise, or it might be that you're getting exercise because your real goal is to be healthier for your family. So you can go down and down and down and get kind of reductive. But the point of the exercise is that when you're doing software work and you're designing a product or a solution for somebody, there's going to be a lot of noise and just a little bit of signal. So asking so what over and over helps you figure out what the real outcome or what the real goal of the work you're doing should be. Ultimately, it should help you figure out how to measure your success, whether you're creating a product or a solution that's going to be valuable to people or not. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of mission statements. This is your overall goal. And Kevin and I just kind of did a mission statement there where his mission statement ended up being, success for his students. But there's a few different ways you can put it. And I want to give you these examples to show you some do's and don'ts. Everyone good with that so far?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Yep. Cool. All right. So I just kind of wrote this in. I'm not saying that this is your goal. So mission statement 1, we want to make the best portal for kids to learn and use software. Can anyone tell me a problem with that statement?
It is not measurable.
Yeah. What does best mean, right? Best what? It could be best anything. Second example, we want kids to learn more about software here than anyone else. Okay, that might be measurable. But let's look at a third statement. We want kids and teachers to feel comfort with tech and be ready for new jobs. So number 2 and number 3 might sound the same, and number 2 might be how you get to number 3, but there really are different outcomes. One is about people feeling comfortable and getting jobs. One is more about learning for learning's sake alone, or having the best learning platform. So as you're going through your requirements and you're figuring out which things you want to prioritize, your statement as to your overall mission is going to determine what things are really important and should be measured, and what things are not important and you don't really need to worry too much about them. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay, cool. So that's all a way of getting to say, like, outcomes are what define requirements, and outcomes are mostly for other people. And as I forget who said it, somebody said it, because I'm not looking at the Discord list. Outcomes are things you can measure, because it's really hard to improve what you can't measure. If you can't measure it, how do you know you're done, right? So, the outcome is going to define how you write your requirements. I'll give you a couple examples of this. When the iPod came out back in forever ago, the way that they put their advertising forward was iPod 1,000 songs in your pocket. At a time when some of their competitors, MP3 players, I think the Zune, whatever, the Microsoft thing, was like, we have 456, megabytes, whatever it was, of music. One company was speaking about their technical features, and another company was talking about what people who use their product would get out of using the product, what mattered to them, the outcomes that matter to them. So it's really important when you're thinking about requirements to specify outcomes for other people, not based on technical specifications, the library you happen to be favorable to, some cool idea that you want to learn about, unless that is the outcome you want. And when I say they're for other people mostly, I mean, you'll probably have some internal ones that you'll want for you, but outcomes should mostly be defined in the experience of other people and defined in the situation they're in. When I want to listen to music, do I care about how many megabytes I have, or do I care about how many songs I can listen to? It might be that I can listen to more music if I have more megabytes than an iPod, but if I just take a quick glance at these, I know which one I'm going to go with. Another analogy you can see here is the Mario one. When you come up with a solution, it's like making Mario with a fireball. Does everyone know Mario with a fireball, or am I just way too old for this?
I know that.
Okay,
I know that.
everyone knows Mario and the fireball? No? Okay.
Yes, I know
We
that.
do know
Yeah.
her.
Yeah, classic is a classic for us.
He's iconic enough to transcend time.
Thank you. Mario is timeless. All right. So then, how do we do that? How do we arrive at what the requirements are going to be? in order to make the project successful. So this is a pretty classic cycle. If you look on the internet or take a course on this, or look at somebody's blog, you'll find about 1 billion variants on this idea and how it should be done and the way you should measure it. But you can kind of think of it as like a scientific process. You have a hypothesis, you go test that thing, and with some sort of concept, I'll come back to that, and then you get feedback from people, right? So your hypothesis might be, I can create the best tasting, I can create the sweetest lemonade ever, and 60% of people will like it. You go test your lemonade with a bunch of people, get their feedback. I liked it, but it was too bitter at one part. It was way too sweet. I felt gross, whatever. And then go back and change something, test it again. Go back, change something, test it again, test it again. The idea is that you're working on a cycle of continuous improvement, and sometimes rejecting your original hypotheses. So has anyone taken an Agile course or talked about Agile versus Waterfall and all that in their lessons and et cetera so far? And someone tells me what Agile means. It's like a super loaded question.
Agile is iterative product design and implementation.
Okay. How is it different than Waterfall? Anyone? Okay,
in my experience, Waterfall is something that you sort of design all up front.
Yeah, exactly. So Agile is about making really small, concrete steps and testing them over and over and over until you kind of get to whatever solution solves the problem the best. Waterfall is doing an immense amount of upfront work to figure out exactly how everything should work and how it should fit together, and then going and building that thing and hoping it works. Anyone tell me what the pitfall of that approach is? Probably just said it right there.
Things change as you're building it. Maybe you run into something that you didn't anticipate.
Exactly. Yeah, you might find a technical issue. You might that's going to get in the way of the project, or customers might be like, actually, I don't like this, or I want this to be different. Or the stakeholders, even if you're not selling it, they're like your customers will say, this has to change. This isn't working for me. So the problem with waterfall development is you invest all this time and effort, and then you put something out there and you find that you got some part wrong, and it's like, oh, now all that work has to start over. So for your project, especially since I think for some of you this is a first project with a set of stakeholders, what I recommend is starting small wherever possible. And starting small doesn't necessarily mean even always writing code. If you can test something by drawing up how the thing will work on a sheet of paper, handing it to a potential user and asking them some questions about it, that's even better because it's even faster for you. If you can test something by going out there and simulating the software with a bunch of mock-ups that you can click through, that's fine too. But it's better to test one little thing at a time where it makes sense without losing context, than to test a whole bunch of things at once. Anyone ever watch like any of those like restaurant rescue shows or the Mean Chef Ramsay? I think any of those. The Mean Chef. Okay, can anyone tell me what they do in a restaurant is failing? Like what's one of the first things they do?
Fix the team.
Fix the team. Anything else?
They greet whoever's coming in. They'll greet them first, and then they'll seat them, and then there's a process. Yeah. Yeah, and I see this in, I don't watch restaurant shows, but I've seen them. And when one of the two things I always notice are that they always go right out to the sidewalk, and they just start asking people, "Hey, have you ever had food here? Would you add food here? Did you like it?
why, right? They ask them why they're into the restaurant, not into the restaurant, and they get that kind of critical feedback from people that enables a restaurant to make changes. Another thing they usually do is they reduce the number of recipes. You ever seen like one of those shows and they're like, you have 500 recipes. Why are you trying to do this? Anyone?
There was a curry restaurant, I believe, in Britain where they had an assemble it how you want kind of deal, and Ramsey was like, "This is stupid. Just make a couple of things really, really well rather than do everything to mediocrity."
Yeah.
Yourself too thin or something like that. I think that's the phrase.
Exactly, yeah. So like if you think about like supporting all those different recipes, now you've got to have all the different produce, all the different parts. You have to train everybody in how it works. You might have different machines, or in your case, different programming patterns or libraries or implementations or data sets. It's usually better and much more effective, especially when you're starting out with a solution, to really organize for finding the smallest amount of effort and complexity, which will result in the greatest amount of value. And you measure that by continually going out to the sidewalk in front of the restaurant, so to speak, and getting that feedback. In this long protracted metaphor, the people on the sidewalk are your users, and I think Kevin, you're playing that role today, right? You're going to be a stakeholder for the project we're going to talk about, right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so a typical process of building a product and getting it out there, and there's lots of variance on this too because it's tech and everyone has an opinion. But this is a pretty common one, is prototype and pilot, MVP, and release. So a prototype, can someone give me a definition of a prototype? What's a prototype? What does that word mean?
Kind of like a proof of concept, if that makes sense.
It does, but I'm going to play the so what game. Okay, so what? Why does it exist?
So we can get a good idea to see if it hypothetically would work without doing all of the work.
Perfect. Yep. Prototype is something you test. What's a pilot? Well, I already have the answer. A pilot is just a prototype that you test with a small number of people. Why do we start with a small number of people?
Because scale makes everything more complicated.
Yes. And honestly, most of the time when you get feedback from, as long as you have the right stakeholders, we'll talk about that, in your, you're interviewing them and you're testing things with them and getting feedback, most of the time you're going to get kind of the same answers. It's kind of like when news people go out on the street and interview somebody after an earthquake. Yeah, everyone's going to kind of say the same thing. By the time you get to 7 people or more, you're going to probably hear the same few points over and over. An MVP just means you're a little more confident and you're testing it with more people. And a release is saying, we're really confident in this. Let's keep going. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So the core thing of requirements is to write them up so everyone has them, are literally on the same page, and keep testing different ways of accomplishing them, so that you are changing requirements if you need to, or changing how you're going to solve requirements before you get into these really scary cycles where it's like, I've been working on this thing for 2 months. I have no idea if it's going to work on a technical level. I don't even know if customers are really going to like it or not. We haven't really tested the idea on paper, on a whiteboard, on a simulated software design, so we'll find out. And these are the kind of headaches. This whole requirements changing thing is one of the reasons people in the industry I'm in leave their job. I would say it's among the top reasons that I've seen. It's just, if people keep changing requirements on you and you're trying to program something, it's kind of like trying to build a bridge and then having somebody walk up to you on like you're 70% done through the bridge, and then someone walks up to you and is like, oh, by the way, it also needs to raise up to let boats go under it, and it needs to be capable of supporting like seven semi-trucks. You would lose your hat, right? At that point, you'd be so upset. That happens on volunteer projects all the time too. So that's why we take an agile approach. Start small and test in really limited fashions, and hopefully keep the project pretty small. Everyone good with that so far?
Yep.
Sits well with
Yep.
me.
Cool. All right, writing recs. So requirements. There's kind of good and bad or less good ways to do this. One of the most popular ways of writing a requirement in the industry today is called the job story. There used to be something called a user story. This might be a little bit too detailed. We'll find out. But I kind of want to go through it because it's kind of an important point. Anyone ever seen like jokes for designers or anyone like that? That like the CEO comes by, he's like, or she comes by, and he's like, "Can you make the logo?" Or they come by, "Can you make the logo bigger?" Anyone strike a chord? No. Okay, fine. So, have you ever had feedback where they gave you feedback? A person gave you feedback on something they wanted changed, and you did the feedback, and then they came back to you and they were like, "I'm still not happy. This isn't what I expected. This isn't what I really wanted."
Oh yeah, absolutely. I actually had a friend named Patik. He was servicing a freelance contract, and the client came back to him on like 4 separate occasions for him to basically rewrite the entire front end because
Oh,
he didn't like the design each time. So yeah.
Gotcha. Anyone else?
It's similar to like when people do voice acting, where it's just like, oh, it could turn out right, even though you've done like maybe 50 takes of the same thing, and it drives you crazy. Or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because so one of the challenges there is, we all have times when we're not really sure what we want, but one of the things that you can do to prevent that from happening, getting into those situations where you show someone, in this case, the stakeholder, Kevin, in the project, in your own team, the project or the hypothesis, and they just kind of look at you like, this is completely not what I'm after, right? And so traditionally, there's been a couple of techniques that people in product design and product development and customer success and all those things have used to make sure that when they're capturing requirements, they're writing them, and it's good to write them out, so that everyone is really moving towards the right outcome. So the traditional one is called the user story, and it kind of goes like, it's the one you see on the bottom here. It's the one that personally I think is the bad one, and it goes as we'll play Mad Lib with Kevin here. Okay, Kevin, let's try to do this in real time. Kevin, what's your role as a what in this project? Okay, as an educator, I want to
teach kids concepts besides coding.
Okay, I want to teach kids concepts aside from coding so that
they understand computing beyond just coding.
Cool. All right. So that's not bad. We've learned a lot there already, right? But there's a couple of things that are tough in there. It's hard to it can be hard to measure teach kids concepts in coding, but there's also something missing from that statement. Does anyone know what it is? It's Kevin's situational context, right? As human beings, we don't do things in a vacuum. We generally want things when we're in a certain situation. We want to eat when we're hungry. We want to impress others when we're being social, or maybe not. Maybe we want to hide. There's nothing like situationalism for humanity, right? So let's try doing something through a job story the other way. And it's going to be a little awkward at first, but it's an interesting way to look at the problem with the end user or the customer stakeholder. So Kevin, if you'll try again with me. So what situation are you in where you want to see these outcomes? Like, when is it that you're motivated to see this happen?
So in a classroom with grade 1 to grade 8 students potentially, and we've got about an hour of time to teach them about computing.
Okay, awesome. Let's stop there for a second. Does everyone see how much more information we got from making decisions right there?
Yeah.
Yep.
A lot more information.
Big difference, right? Like the first one, it wasn't bad. It was just kind of vague. But in the second one, we started to get things that are going to tell us some key aspects of the choices we need to make. How long the person has, that they're in the classroom. We learned about the other stakeholders, the young folks that are in that room with Kevin. And we learned more about the situation. So it's going to influence a lot of how we do the software design. We could really dig into that further, and we could say, like, okay, Kevin, so tell me a little more about that situation. Like, you're in the class, this is something you need to use for less than an hour on average per lesson. And would this repeat a bunch, or would this be like a one-off, or like, how do you see that playing out?
So it would probably be a one-off within each classroom in the sense that like a teacher would use this once a year. But another big thing is that it'd be ideal if a lot of teachers don't understand much about computing. And so it would be ideal if teacher didn't really have to understand it to actually use it successfully. If they don't understand the concepts themselves, that it's accessible for them too.
Wonderful. So now we have even more information. We know that the teacher is in a situation of not having much technical knowledge. We know that they're in the situation of a classroom. We know that there's another stakeholder called the student that's in the situation of the classroom. We know that they're in a situation of a 1 hour lesson. That'll probably be a one-off. And we've learned some of the motivations. So if I was to look at your motivation now, Kevin, when you're in that situation, is it fair to say that you need something that will let you get that lesson out very quickly and with a minimum amount of friction given the amount of time you have?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So when you're in the classroom and potentially a teacher with limited technical knowledge, you want to quickly get a lesson on programming and tech out and thinking to lots of students so you can, what would you say?
This part's a little bit open, but basically the problem in with a lot of these activities to teach kids about computer science is they're all on programming. So what we want to do is teach them that computing is more than coding. We want them to be exposed to some concepts. It could be one concept, but one concept at least that is not programming, but is part of computing.
Gotcha. So your situation is, part of your situational context is that there's lots of programming courses, but you want to teach them something a little different and arguably a little bit more than that contextually. And the outcome that you're expecting is that a teacher of limited technical experience could quickly get this out to their students in a limited amount of time, and they would learn about not just programming, but also computing and kind of programming design thinking and that kind of skill development as well. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
Cool. So for everyone on the call, what I was doing there was I was asking that so what question over and over, and I was looking at the job story, that nice simple graphic up top, and I was just asking over and over. So I got some different people, I got some different situations, I got some different outcomes. Those things are what are going to form your requirements. So we started to get something that we could measure as being successful. The teacher needs to be able to do this in under an hour, including setup and wrapping up and looking at student participation, right? We can measure that. They need to be able to use it easily and access it quickly. You could put a time box on that and say, okay, they need to do it within 5 minutes. You could do an emotional job. You could say they need to feel comfortable getting into it, even if they aren't comfortable with tech in general, which partly is a time thing. You can measure that. So we start getting into requirements that are useful that way. Any questions on that before I show you some examples?
Actually, I have a question. How sort of granular do you usually try and get with these before you sort of feel comfortable that you have an idea of kind of what you want to build?
That's a really great question. So that's why I think I called it Recs and Specs. So requirements are those broad stories. That's kind of what we did there. Specifications are when you're getting kind of granular, you're getting into details, you're starting to touch on how it should work. If you're looking at, as a teacher, I want to be able to get a student to take a course and see, proof of learning within, let's give me 10 minutes for setup and tear down within 40 minutes. And that's a really high level requirement. A sub-requirement might be something like, I can get going on this with all my students within 5 minutes or 10 minutes, okay? A specification is, I can log in and get everyone to create an account, if that's your solution, within 5 minutes. A test might be that whether or not using accounts or not having accounts is the better way to do it. The way that we usually, I think I can answer your question this way, the way we usually structure things in my experience is by kind of defining requirements according to this table. I'll see if I can zoom in a little bit. These are actual requirements from some work we did. It went pretty well. We give them a title. We give them a user story or a job story. You can see here we're defining situations and we're talking a little bit about measures, quantities. We have a list of how important these things are, but I also have a whole bunch of notes and links to designs, mock-ups, in this case Jira tickets, that will probably have some more specs, some more notes. This is kind of where you'd be writing stuff like, especially as the project goes on, you'd be writing items like, hey, you have to make sure this is accessible, and hey, you have to make sure that this works well on all devices because we identified that different classrooms within our target group, use everything from tablets to traditional computers based on the resources and privileges available to the school, or whatever it happens to be. Hey, this needs to be in more than one language. Ideally, you won't have much in the way of specifications at the start because that starts getting you into a waterfall process. You want to keep them pretty open and be pretty willing to just kind of test a bunch of different stuff for the requirements and see what works well and what doesn't. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So it sounds like with these job stories, you sort of define the general solution or the general outcome that you want. And then that leaves you enough room to test maybe different approaches.
Exactly. And it's not uncommon to even, especially early on in development, to just kind of have like a couple sub rows here where you're going, here's something we're testing, here's something we're testing. Sometimes, it really is as simple as just being like, okay, everyone jot down 2 ideas for how we're going to try solving this. We're going to draft up what we think it'll look like and how it'll work on a bunch of index cards, like note cards or stickies, and then we're going to put it in front of somebody and kind of pretend that it really works like software. You can also use tools like Envision or Balsamic. I think they have free accounts where you can have kind of like click through really basic wireframes. There's a billion ways to do user testing. even just talking to people is still way better than not talking to them or talking through a potential solution with them. Generally, visuals are good, though, because it kind of gives them an idea of what you're talking about. Words can be confusing. Okay. So format for job requirements, it's basically what we just talked about. What's the outcome? Who is it for? What situation are they in? When I say who's it for, I mean what role are they in? Student, teacher, etc. What outcome do they want? How do we measure success? And of course, we just did specs there. So the key part of this when you're getting going is what's sometimes called the stakeholder interview. At my company, we almost always ask the same question when we're getting started with a customer. And it's a very open question by intention, and it's really simple. What do you want to see as the outcome or the result of this project? What does success look like to you? Because based on that question, you might get answers you wouldn't expect. So let's go ahead and do that thing. Mr. Kevin, what do you want to see as the outcome or result of this project? How do you measure success for whatever we end up doing here?
I'd like teachers to have an activity they can pull out for an hour in their classroom and teach kids about a concept like binary numbers or something like that, and have the class enjoy it, be engaged, and come away understanding some new concept in computing.
Awesome. Does anyone have any questions on that? We'll get more into it when we get into requirements.
To how many users can be using it at once? Like, is there anything that could prevent like the whole class from using it, or would you need to use something bigger to handle like many people using it at once?
Ideally, every kid in the class would be able to use it.
Okay.
At the same time,
And,
like independently.
Classrooms, like different areas. Let's say like there's a grade 8 class that wants to do it and a grade 5 class around the same time. Like, should that still be able to handle everything at once?
Yeah, and we'd be open to it'd be open to any grade. So it could be designed for grade 5s. It could be designed for grade 8s. That's okay.
Okay.
Cool. All right, I'm going to put a link to I have so many tabs into an open Google Doc for you here, where I have placed just kind of a basic requirements table, kind of matches the one I was showing you a moment ago. And we have our stories here, and we have our importances here. Each requirement can be a low priority, medium, or high. I guess you can write critical, you can write whatever you want, really. And then some points here for some spec notes, like that'll help you remember certain things. So as we go through the stakeholder interview, we can start writing down something. So to help us get started, I kind of put in a generic one, but we already have one, and hopefully y'all will go back and kind of fill this out. But it's as a instructor with limited technical knowledge, part of my big typing. When I am in the classroom and want to teach tech concepts, I'm just going to call it that for now, and I have an hour, so that's my situation. I want to, let's say, be able to get everyone started within 10 minutes. So I can, let's see, focus the classroom's educational time to 70% of the time available. Okay, that's all pretty wordy. But the key thing there is that even in this statement, there's some assumptions that they need to be able to get everyone started within 10 minutes, that they want to be able to focus the educational time to 70% of the time available. So for our interview of our stakeholder, we're going to ask some questions about that. So Kevin, is it really safe to say that most teachers will have about an hour?
Yes.
Okay, and do you think 10 minutes is I mean, you have like for the situation you're in with students, and I think you said they're what grade levels?
Grades 1 to 8 could work.
1 to 8. Great students. And how long can you look away from those students before it's a problem? Like in terms of getting them going on some tech thing.
Yeah, it varies, but like about 5 minutes, say.
Within 5 minutes. What's your ideal?
5 minutes is ideal.
Within 5 or like 2 or?
I mean, it'd be great if it was within 1 minute or 2 minutes, but.
What grade are you referring to though? Like if it was a bunch of grade 1s, like just to get them set up on the computers and all of them, like what would you say the time amount would be for them? Because they would have a little bit of a different timeline, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. It would kind of vary for sure, depending on the grade of the students. I would say ideally, though. I mean, ideally, still 1 to 2 minutes, but for grade 1s, like realistically, that could be 10 minutes. You know.
Yeah.
We can also kind of, I don't know if this is the time for it, but I mean, it doesn't have to be grades 1 to 8. It'll be one of those grades. Like you can pick a tighter range. Like this is for grade 7s or 8s, right? And then make it more specific from there.
Yeah, perfect. That's far more agile, right? Start smaller, go from there. So, which one would you pick? For at least for a prototype, like for getting started.
Yeah, for a prototype, we could say grades 6 to 8.
Okay, cool. So what we'll do is we'll make this 6 to 8. We'll delete this and we'll just make a note that says maybe try grade 1 to 5 later. Cool. So this is how requirements work. We kind of just keep going through these situations and these outcomes. So it's time for me to turn some of the interviewing and some of the discussion over to the group correctly. So I'm going to go on silent for a second and ask somebody to ask Evan a question. I will take notes though. Don't all talk at once.
I'm not sure if this is the best question, but I kind of want to know about how we might be able to measure the success of these students learning. Specifically, kind of like what are the sort of the computer concepts we're wanting them to kind of take away with them, and how will we know when they're successful with that?
So I'm pretty open as to which one you choose. I've got like a list that I kind of made just quickly. It's just sort of like binary numbers or flowcharts or Linux commands or databases. So there's a whole list of things basically that the group could choose from really. So I'm pretty open as to what. But in terms of measuring learning, like I was kind of picturing that the likely solution would either be a game or something that involves gamification, where like as the students maybe answer questions or something like that, they get badges or they get stars or something like that. So the solution itself might actually be able to measure its success in the sense of if the kid progresses to the end of the game or they progress to the end of the questions or whatever it is that they're working through, then that's an indication that they must have learned get that far. So the game itself or whatever it is that solves the problem could do some self-measurement. In terms of, not to rant like myself out too much here, but the other thing to measure success too would be we could ask teachers. So there's a lot of outreach that goes on in Hamilton in classrooms and that. And one thing we could do is we could ask a teacher to try this out as a pilot. And then we could ask the teacher and say, how did the students like it? Did you find them to be engaged? Do you think they learned? We could even ask the teacher to quiz them the next day to see if they actually retained anything. So we could measure it that way too.
Okay, I think I might have a question here. So do you think it would be best, like, so let's say we're making a platform where we can have games on there for the students, as you said. Um, do you think it'd be ideal to split the games up in terms of like their subject matter? So like maybe there's for example maybe some sort of game to create UML diagrams when they're learning about animals or something, like so that would be like under science, I guess, and then you could have something for geography or I'm not
So
really
yeah, no,
sure.
yeah, so I hear you. I mean, I think I was thinking like depending on the scope that you want to tackle, that it might just be like one game, it might just be one thing, but ultimately getting to the point where there's a website where they can pick between different games, that would be really cool. Um, I mean, if you're looking at this from like an agile kind of approach, it might be like figuring out how many people can tackle how many projects and making like one, two, or three games for each topic, and then linking them together later. So I'm pretty open as to what you want to do there. But my thought was just sort of like maybe it'll just be one game, maybe it'll just be one thing, and then after that, if we want to link them together somehow, that would be then thing to do then. But it would definitely be focused in on teaching one topic, like one thing.
Okay, yeah, so the priority is getting one game out there as opposed to getting a platform that will hold the games. That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but the
that's good.
platform's something that could come later for sure.
Okay, sweet.
Okay, then are you guys aiming towards having teachers contribute ideas themselves, or the folks who come up with it, the platform would be doing that?
For ideas for the
Actual content.
that would be up to you guys, because you guys are actually the subject matter experts, not the teachers. A lot of teachers. So just so you know, the inspiration for this is that in Ontario they've added computing to the grade 1 to 8 curriculum. They did it in a kind of very vague way where nobody's totally sure what it really means. And there's a lot of like hour of code activities out there, they're called. If you go to like hour of code on Google, it'll come up. There's a lot of hour of code activities that teach kids coding. All of the other things that are part of computing are not really covered by them. All of those games, they pretty much all teach basic programming with like if statements and loops and things like that. So you've all been exposed to more than just that. I mean, you've seen flowcharts, you've done like some mathematics in your courses, you've done some interface design, you've done data structures and algorithms, right? And so because you've been exposed to those things, you're kind of the teachers in terms of coming up with what the content could be.
Very cool. Okay, thanks.
I guess I have another question. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this, but hopefully. But like, how can we successfully gauge like the difficulty for people who are in grade 6 to 8? Like, I feel like it's kind of hard to be like, oh yeah, they'll get that, and maybe they won't understand.
So that's a really good question. No, that's a really good question. I mean, to be honest, it's kind of hard. There isn't really like an easy answer to that question. One thing you can do is you can look at similar things that are directed at that age group. So Hour of Code's actually a pretty good inspiration for that. Another one would be Khan Academy. But if you go to Hour of Code, they break it down, I believe, by grade, and you can kind of see what those applications are trying to teach kids at that age. And you might be able to use that as a bit of a rough gauge. But in general, it's like, yeah, you can't be completely sure until you try it. The other way you could look at it too is if you looked at this would be we have to dig it out somewhere, or we have to find it somewhere. But the curriculum in Ontario is posted online, so you'd be able to see like, okay, by grade 6 they understand graphs. So therefore, if we did something that had X, Y coordinates in it, we could anticipate that they should be able to understand that, right? But by grade 6, they haven't seen algebra. So if you're going to say variable X or something like that, then you can't really anticipate they're going to understand what that means because maybe they haven't seen it yet. So that'd be another thing to look at as well to gauge understanding. The other thing we could do too is we could even like talk to a teacher. we might be able to do that as well. So, but that might be something to do once there's like an idea that's kind of fleshed out, and be like, okay, now that we've got something on paper, what do you think of this? And they might be able to point out any kind of concern, to be like, well, that might be a little too much, or maybe this is going to be too easy for them.
Okay, yeah, cool. Thank you.
All right, so I'll throw in a question so we can keep going here. Kevin, maybe you could tell us a little bit more. Like you mentioned a couple of stakeholders there, potential users, like teachers and students. Can you tell us a little bit more about the teachers and students who might be getting this solution?
So the teachers, I'm assuming, are, let's say, grade 6, 7, 8 elementary school teachers in Ontario. And their situation is the province has told them to teach more computing, and they've given them very vague guidelines as to how to do it. And the kids have now seen Scratch. They've seen Scratch. They've seen Hour of Code. They've probably seen Khan Academy. They've seen a lot of the sort of generic learn to code stuff out there already. So if the teacher puts that out again this year, the students, they'll do it. They'll have some fun, but they're not going to learn anything new. And they kind of already have seen it. That's the situation there. And at the same time, the teachers are aware that computing is important. Teachers actually generally feel bad that they can't teach more about it. They wish they could. So that's another thing you could say about them too, as a general characteristic, that they want to do this. And I would say that the teachers, they can generally figure out whatever the kids can figure out. So like if you make a game that'll teach the kids something, they'll be able to work it out themselves too. So it's not that they like, when we say they don't understand computing, it's not that they can't, it's just that they just haven't been exposed to it because they never got it when they were going through school. And now they're adults, they never had a reason to learn it. So that's what we could say about the teachers. In terms of more we could say about the students, they don't fully appreciate maybe career pathways in tech. That's a bit of a segue. I don't know if I want to go into that too much, but I would say that's a thing, is that they understand that like coding is a thing and there's jobs out there in it. I don't know how much they really know about it though. That's something that's sort of there, just as long as we're talking about them. I would say the students, when they see something like this, that's sort of like a one-off hour activity that's not going to be built on again, some of them see it as an opportunity to goof off, because it's like they know it's not going to show up on their report card beyond maybe their participation grade. So because they know it's a one-off, they're not as keyed into it as the thing that's going to be on their history test or whatever it is, right? So that's not terrible. That can be a good thing, because the students then feel more enabled to make mistakes and learn. The only thing is that you do got to worry a little bit about engagement then. If the thing is too boring, if the thing is too much like school, then it's an hour one-off, then they can easily start to blow that off. I'll just put in the minimum, I'll just sit here and get through this thing. Whereas if you make it something fun, like a game, it doesn't have to be a game. I keep saying game. I'm not trying to lead you towards a solution. But if you make it something fun like a game, that generally goes over very well, because it's a one-off, but they're having fun, they're learning something new, and they kind of get into it a bit more. So engagement, something you got to think of with the students for sure, is that because it's a one-off, they can easily blow it off. Yeah.
So can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So, Kevin, it sounds like in terms of outcomes, one of the really key parts is that the students have to be, the content or whatever the solution is has to be engaging in some way that makes it more interesting and more fun, enough for them to watch. So it's kind of like a class movie. If it's a boring movie, everyone's just going to go to sleep or goof off. But if it's something that's actually kind of interesting, maybe they'll watch it. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay, cool. All right. So you mentioned that you might be able to to connect this group with some of the other stakeholders outside of you directly so they can learn from them. Do you think that might be possible? That's kind of the go out on the sidewalk and talk to people about the restaurant thing.
Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll actually reach out a bit and see if I can get maybe a grade 6, 7, or 8 teacher on board to help with thoughts on it.
And follow up.
I think I might have an idea for a game. Although this is kind of a long shot and I don't really have like a lot of details about it, but you mentioned graphs and that kind of got the cogs turning. And I was thinking like maybe a game where it's a directed graph with like distance, and they're driving a car and they have to get somewhere, and with finding the best path, and the levels get harder and harder as they go.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you know. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say just go to that or something like that. Like you're totally in the right direction. So yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So I want to just take a second to say like that conversation there, where people just throw out ideas and they get direct feedback from a stakeholder. That's super valuable because each time you put out an idea like that, you're basically going, here's a prototype idea. You know, could it solve this problem of getting students engaged? Could it solve the problem of getting teachers engaged? It's something you can test some of these things against. Yeah, cool. Anyone else have any other ideas? There are no bad ideas at this stage. Anything they want to throw out to Kevin?
An element of competition between the students because as far as I know, students in elementary school tends to say gym is their favorite class, probably because there is an element of competition. So would that be a boon to this?
Competition can definitely work. The other thing can work too is like teamwork, where it's like there's this whole area now of pro-social games where you're trying to get the students to work together on something towards a common goal. And that can be as motivating as competition sometimes. You can also have that together with competition. So you could have like our students working together on something, and all the other students in class are also in a team that's working together on something. That can work as well. So yeah, competition can work, but I would say also kind of in the same vein, collaboration and like social kind of gaming can also be a cool thing to have as well.
Hey Kevin, Ishkan here. So I just have a quick question regarding types of games. I'm thinking of more like the teacher's perspective of things. Would you want games where teachers kind of have control over the game itself and like progress that way? Where, for example, kids can have like you said, like 2 different teams to progress to a reward or something, and the teachers can control the overall game? Or would you want games just to be all solos for each individual kid?
So it's actually kind of easier if it's more the kids can load it up and just run it themselves. The typical case for this is that the teacher takes the class to the computer lab for an hour, and that's where they're going to go over some kind of activity that takes an hour, let's say. And so you could kind of assume that each kid has their own computer in front of them, their own laptop or desktop. And for that reason, it seems like the more, I don't know if I'd say like individual, but things where each kid has their own computer and the teacher doesn't really have to do anything, works best. And the other thing too with the teacher intervening while the game is going on is that the kids will go at drastically different paces. So some kids just already know the concept or already know computing, or they're just a wizard and they just blow through the activity really quickly. Other kids will sit there like struggling with it. And so in that sense, to having the teacher like coordinate that can be maybe not the best thing, because the teacher's often floating around the classroom helping the students that are struggling with the thing. And so they're usually allocating the time towards that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
I'm not sure if this is really helpful, but maybe because I live not too far from an actual elementary school, I could ask, like, because I used to attend that place, I could actually ask if they could help us test or something like that. I actually live like 5 minutes away from that place. It's standing right in front of my house. So I'm just an offering here. That's all.
I think that's cool. If you got a contact that you want to reach out to, I think that's cool. It's always cool to have like somebody that has a connection to some place. If that doesn't work out or whatever, though, there's a organization in town that Mohawk works with a fair bit called IEC Hamilton, and they have connections to all the schools as well. So we could make sure we get in touch with some school.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Overtime.
That's a really good question too, because speaking as an entrepreneur, it's that kind of stuff that can actually get you going on a project. Like when you start out, you don't have connections usually. Well, unless you're really lucky and privileged, but usually, you have to go find the people, and you just use whatever connection you have, or ask a connection for a connection for a connection. And the more directly you can talk to the people that are going to use the platform, whether they're students or teachers, the better information you'll have. On that note, Kevin, accessibility and inclusivity, are there project parameters here that we should be thinking about in terms of languages, different learning or skill abilities that both are important in terms of including everybody, but are also just important of any classroom setting and the roles that go on there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think sort of version 1, you could assume English. Given that we're talking about Ontario, though, there is like French immersion schools, right? So if like in an agile way, French could be accommodated, like that would be kind of cool, because then French immersion, I believe like in Eastern Ontario, there's some French speaking areas, I believe, as well, right? So that would be a thing to add, though maybe not like for version 1 when we're just kind of testing it with an English school. But and then I think for other forms of inclusivity and accessibility, I think if you have things like in-game characters or in-game avatars and things like that, I mean, I think you want to be representative there. You want to make sure that if you're from an underrepresented group, you could see yourself in the game. Let's say if there were characters in the game, so that'd be something to be mindful of, I think. Then we're just talking about like kind of like universal design in general and accessible design in general. It's like, certain games, it's like, well, the person may need to be able to see to play the game just because of the nature of it, right? You can't accommodate everything, but it'd be nice if, where possible, universal design could be used to make it as accessible as possible. So, I mean, just as an example, like some games, yeah, there will be an audio component, but there'll be like subtitles as well. So if you're hearing impaired, then it's more accessible for you. So keeping a view towards that would be very much ideal, of course. Yeah. That's my thoughts there.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I know I keep asking that. It's just that I type super fast and loud, so I'm trying to spare everybody the pain. Kevin, on that note, disability and access, is there a group that, and it can be any type of group, it doesn't have to be disability. Is there any social group, skill group, disability group, any kind of socially identified group that's being really underserved in terms of learning tech? I'm just thinking from an Agile perspective. Is there something where there'd be high value and not a lot of effort to date?
It's hard to say. I mean, like it's kind of a broad problem. Where basically, if you're in like a wealthy neighborhood, like rates of digital literacy in general tend to be extremely high. Whereas if you're in like lower income areas, it tends to go lower. It's also like there's papers out there showing that There's also a relationship with like race and things like that as well. That you see it kind of affecting groups disproportionately as well. So, I mean, if you're looking at Ontario, I think like lower income areas, rural areas, reserves, I think it's likely that you'd find lower rates of digital literacy in those areas, and therefore like there'd be some priority there. Now, I don't know how that is incorporated into the design of the app, but that's not really what we're solving here. I mean, that's just sort of putting it out there, right? It's definitely something to keep in mind.
Okay. I'll let other people keep asking questions. By the way, folks, please do type into the page here. It's not mine. It's yours. It's yours. Your document. I'm just because it takes a little time to write out requirements properly. I'm just creating rows of notes so that you can go back to them later and start writing this stuff up. No other questions? Everyone knows exactly what to build?
I've kind of got a few ideas that have sort of popped up. Do you think that something like text-based, like a purely text-based, like almost like a choose your own adventure sort of generative story type thing might be interesting or effective here?
I think it could be. I think actually MIT made like a bit of a text-based game for learning about Linux commands. And I think it had a bit of a storytelling kind of narrative to it as well. So there's a precedent for that kind of a thing. The only thing with text-based that would make me a little bit nervous would be if it could also be engaging for students. I'm not saying it couldn't be, but that'd just be something to be in mind.
Yeah, for sure.
So you mentioned that there are lots of activities that already do what this is doing for programming. Am I correct in assuming that this implies that you would like to introduce kids to things such as, say, systems administration or networking or other jobs that involve computers but aren't necessarily the sexy job of programming?
Yeah, essentially that's part of it, is making them aware that like working in computing is more than programming, and that computing involves concepts that are not just programming. And when I say programming, I guess I mean like the types of programming that are well covered right now are imperative programming, like Python and JavaScript and that kind of thing, like a conventional programming language. The other thing that's reasonably well covered too is HTML and CSS. So HTML and CSS are also well covered in terms of programming, but there are areas of programming that are not well covered. And the one that I would say that matters that's not well covered is like SQL or how databases work. So that's an area where it is programming, and I'm saying like concepts other than programming, but that one is not well covered and yet is super important. And it kind of, there's a lot of work for database programmers out there as well. So that'd be another kind of example there. But yeah, no, another thing you said there was like sort of like careers that are not just the one sort of job. It's like, that's kind of part of it. Like I wouldn't consider that like a primary goal, but the primary goal is more to just teach them a concept in computing, and one that's not already well covered. But if as a side effect, they learn about some career pathway they didn't know about before, like network systems analyst or system administration or database programmer or something like that, that's pretty cool. Like that's a pretty cool secondary outcome.
So when you talk about ideas that could possibly like cover SQL and database functionality, like are you talking more so from a high level, or like do you think they would be able to actually understand a line of SQL code?
It could be either, and I think they definitely could understand SQL code. I think especially things like selects and inserts and things like that, I think they could understand it. I mean, if you're going to make that a game, it's like it might be focusing in on an aspect of SQL. So one thing that like we kind of take for granted, maybe because like we're programmers, is things like compound conditionals, where we say like if this is true and this is true, or maybe we say if this is true and this is true, or the other thing is true, you know, and this will happen, right? We still? Oh wait, I think we're still on. Then that would also be of interest. Is even just teaching that aspect of SQL programming would be kind of cool.
Okay. I actually I might have an idea. It might sound kind of silly, but what about a like a database game where there's an incoming select query? Okay, actually, hold on. So basically, we're gonna have like a database, and the database is it's about a sandwich shop, and the database tables are going to be split into like condiments, meats, cheeses, like sauces, I don't know, like maybe vegetables. And then what the game will be is there will be a select statement for a sandwich from each of the tables, and then the student has to gather each part of the sandwich from all the database tables to like give the response.
Yep, that could work.
All right, cool.
I just I sort of had another idea for a game as well. What if we had what if the goal of the game was sort of to hack into something? Kevin, I was looking at your list of things, and you know, it could involve them using maybe like Linux command line sort of commands. It could involve maybe inserting, you know, using SQL queries and stuff like that. And maybe it could be a timed challenge or something where you could set up a couple teams and they could have this goal of, I don't know, corrupting a database or retrieving or manipulating some sort of information somewhere. Yeah,
I like I like that idea of hacking. I like the general idea of like them hacking into something. That's kind of cool. Just because like I was talking about games and gamification, right, where you give them like badges or points or something like that, right? So if a kid gets a star, that's called like external motivation because they want to get more stars, and external motivation is great. But one of the things that's really cool is if you can make something that has good internal motivation, where the activity is intrinsically rewarding, where the kid likes to do it just because it's fun inherently. And hacking is kind of like that. Hacking is kind of like that, where it's sort of intrinsically motivating. It's inherently fun, right? So and you could build in different things that way, like you're kind of saying there. So that's a cool idea. The only thing I'd wonder is that like if you're trying to make it, I don't know, hacking's pretty broadly appealing. But sometimes when we're trying to make outreach activities that are reaching kids, one thing we like to keep in mind is, and this is just the thing, so a lot of girls in particular will be interested in activities that are about sort of benefiting the community around them. And that's not like true for everyone, of course. Like that's just whatever it is, what it is. But like a lot of times if you do something like, for example, like we did one outreach activity where it was making a website to teach people how to recycle things better. And that was a hit with like a lot of girls. And it was a kind of thing where it was reaching an underrepresented group in tech. So we like that aspect as well. So the hacking is cool. The only thing I wonder is there a way to make it like hacking for good somehow? Like, you know, there's like white hat hackers and black hat hackers. I wonder if there's a way to make it like hacking for good, because that can appeal to like a broad section of people.
Yeah. Is there a risk that we run, like, I don't know, of making it too fun and the teachers being like, yo, this is maybe a little too engaging?
So it really kind of, honestly, I would say no for the most part, because if you look at a lot of those hour of code activities, a lot of them are just barely teaching coding, in my opinion, and they're really focused in on the fun part. So it'll be like a Star Wars themed thing where you kind of get the character across the screen or something like that, and it barely feels like they're learning coding. So I would say like you can actually skew it pretty heavily towards entertainment, and that's actually okay because then the kids will actually play it.
Cool, thanks.
I just have a general question for each concept of programming. Say, for example, flowcharts. How many games would you expect of flowcharts or some other concept? If
It could just be one game.
Okay.
It could just be one game, really. That's all. And it might have like you might want to have like levels. So one thing with like games, just like a quick, I don't know, like I don't know if I can give like a crash course or whatever in like 5 minutes, or whatever. And you guys are probably already aware of a lot of stuff, anyways. But one thing with games is it's kind of cool if you can have short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. So one cool game, actually, if you want to look up, this would be like pretty. I wouldn't suspect you guys could make something like this specifically, but if you Google Lightbot, and I'll just put in the chat, Lightbot, that's an example of like a really, 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 really well done game to teach kids a coding concept about sequencing instructions, where this robot goes across the stage. What's kind of cool about that game is it has like short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. So if you ever have an idea for a game and you see short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals in the game, that usually is a sign that the game's going to be engaging. So the kid will try to like finish the level, and then if they finish the level, they can finish a sequence of levels. And if they finish a sequence of levels, then they can go on to the next sequence of levels. So there's like a level, a sequence of level, and then another sequence of levels. And there's kind of like the 3 layers there. That's like a thing in gaming and gamification and spurring on engagement that can help. So when you talk about like how many games can there be, one thing you might want to think about is like instead of that, think about like how deep can the game go in terms of levels or variations. Because one thing that's helpful as well with making a game that has, say, a certain number of levels to it is that the kids that are like struggling, they can get through level 1. The kids that are going to blow through level 1, they're going to get a little bit stuck on level 3 because it's more difficult. And that can actually be a good thing because then your game is accommodating different levels of difficulty as well. So a bit of like a rant there on my part, but your question basically was kind of about scope, and you might want to think about scope within one game.
Yeah, I fully understand that. Thanks.
Hey everybody, can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. All right, I'm going to take off. I think you got a good start. Just want to talk to you about next steps here. So we've got requirements doc that's totally open and available to you. I stopped sharing screen because you have it. It's there. You can see everyone's mouse moving around. That's yours. Do whatever you want with it. I will share the presentation slides with Rodney or whomever here and make sure they get out to you. In terms of your next steps as a project, so you've gotten, and I think you'll continue to in this session, get lots of good information from Kevin in his role, and there's a good idea there to get some more information from the 2 other stakeholder types that we identified, which is a certain type of grade school teacher and a student or 2. Usually you just want a couple people when you're starting out that are representative of the groups you're going to be working with or organizing for. So try to avoid, to some extent, the super sophisticated, super digitally capable teachers if you want to get a good sense and good feedback on what a more common or more predictable type of teacher or the type of teacher you're trying to address. Same thing applies to students. So after you get those interviews and you kind of do this pattern with them, and you get even some more information, or after you have some time to come up with ideas and even run that by them. Then the next thing to do is to, as a group, kind of write up your requirements together. This is a really useful thing to do as a group, even though it can be a bit of a time soak, because it helps everyone stay on the same page right when you're starting out, which means that when the complexity comes in later, it'll be a lot easier. So we have all these question and answer notes down near the bottom of the document where Kevin's been kind enough to give us lots of information. So we can take these things and start mapping them into requirements, a list of requirements up top, kind of writing them out as these as job stories, and then jotting some bullet points with ideas on how we might be able to solve them. What that will give you is a set of requirements with priorities in terms of outcomes, and a set of things and ideas that you could test. Then it'll be for you as a group at the end of your requirements writing session to define what things you want to test, and how you want to test it. And again, I encourage doing the simplest, easiest thing possible. Note cards, markers, whiteboards, blackboards, digital whiteboards, whatever. Any questions or anything I can help with before I take off here?
If nobody has any questions, Andrew, I did want to just thank you sincerely for coming out. This has been an incredible help. I personally have learned a lot. Also, your note-taking skills are amazing. I'm really impressed by that.
I'm writing at half speed right now. I do a lot of writing. I'm happy to help. I was excited to see Kevin's on the project, and it's nice to see some of my, at least one of my team members from Weaver is here too. So it's always exciting. Anyway, I'm sure at some point you'll want to follow up with me, and maybe at the requirement writing stage or something. Just send me a note, and we can. If I can come in and help, I will. If you get struggling on something, let me know, and I can usually schedule something and jump on and help you get through it. In the interim, though, I wish everyone the best. I'm really impressed by all the participation and all the work that the new developers are doing, and I always hear from people I work with how great y'all are. So I'm excited to see how this turns up, and based on the questions I heard today, I think it's going to go really well. So great job, and have a nice evening. I'm going to go look at a creek. All right.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Andrew.
No problem.
You're the best.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Okay. If anyone has any ideas that they're too nervous to speak up, honestly, don't even worry. Just let's hear what you got on your mind, whether that's ideas or questions you want to ask Kevin to maybe get a better idea of what we want to build. Does anyone have anything?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking, I know this is very low priority, but online, offline implementations and all that sort of stuff. There's
I think it'd be. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think it's best if it's accessible through a browser and you assume that there's an internet connection, and I wouldn't worry about it working offline.
All right.
Okay. That is a good question, actually. That actually helps us narrow down a ton with our upcoming tech stack workshop. So now that we know the specification is that we should only worry about online, that's actually pretty good to know. Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
Can I still ask for a question?
Of course.
Since we are talking about the involvement of teachers, can I think it as we are actually initially wanting to making this as a part of the quote unquote the how should I say the code curriculum hours. So this can be utilized in as a part of that designated times, isn't it?
Yeah, so that would be ideal, as if it could be used as part of the curriculum, essentially.
So it is ideal, but not essentially. I see. Yeah, because I was keep thinking, yeah, if teacher can involve, the moment that I liked the most when I was teaching kids was when I witnessed actually another kid was teaching kid.
Mm.
Yeah, so I was just wondering how we can just make these kind of things happen even online. I don't know. I have
Yeah,
no
no,
idea.
it's the kind of thing where actually,
Yeah.
I mean, if the kids all have it on their own computer and they're all playing it together, if kids are able to help other kids during the game, like that's definitely a bonus. Doesn't have to be part of the interface, but even just if the kid can look at the other kid's screen and like help them out because they've solved a similar problem or solved the problem just before them, that can be cool.
Yeah, I see.
Hi, Kevin. I think the conversations that you have, with the group tonight, it's great. I think we can probably expand it more to touching upon some concept in networking because I think what you've basically been talking about this entire time with how the curriculum is so focused on getting grade 6 to 8 students involved in like pretty much focus on learning coding. I figured introducing like networking concepts like IP addresses and stuff like that would probably add that extra layer of thinking and knowing that it, that those students can possibly look for jobs as like a system analyst or sysadmin.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's definitely I mean, that would be another good example is like, learning what IP addresses and how those work and, awareness that like network systems in the whole area, like that's definitely like another potential direction. I'm totally open as to what you choose.
Hey Kevin, just a quick question. Are we gonna be like thinking about saving the progress of each student? Or are we are they gonna just start from scratch every time they like go on the browser, well, on the app?
That's a really good question. I think I would say don't worry about saving their progress at all. It'd be kind of cool, I guess, but like I wouldn't worry about it at all, just because they're kind of like throwaway activities that they run for an hour and then they're done with it. So it's kind of easier if they don't save it.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Kevin, would you say it'd be best to have students team up instead of having to do the games solo?
So most of the games that you'll see on like Hour of Code type websites are solo, but the teacher might have them do the games together. Like they might put them into partners together. The other thing with having kids play them together, assuming that they're actually like each have their own device, like their own desktop computer in front of them, let's say, and they're still playing it together somehow, is then that opens up like, how do you make that work? Do you have some kind of concept of a room and the students join the room and then they can play the game together? Like, how will that work? So in some sense, it's kind of like if you can work on a way, if there is some idea that to make it like collaborative or competition or in teams and it's workable, then like cool, that's definitely something that can work. But I wouldn't say it's like a priority because sometimes it's like if you just have a game that the kids can play through individually or as a pair at a computer, then like that's just as good too. So
I guess part of the issue is trying to find the right questions to ask at the same time as trying to figure out what is important in the answers you get from them.
I mean, I think it, to some extent, I think a lot of the big sort of like whys in that have been kind of covered. And I don't know, I mean, for sure, if you guys have more questions, just keep asking them. But to an extent, I think what Andrew was saying there, I think he said something like I think there's a point where you may want to do is kind of come up with like draft set of like potential directions where it's like, we're thinking about, this concept maybe taught in one of these ways, or this concept taught in one of these ways, and come up with like, say, maybe 5 to 10 sort of like draft directions that are just sort of like bullet point level ideas, and then maybe like have a talk with, at that point, like you could have me on it for sure if you like, but you also could have like another stakeholder, like a teacher, and then have a conversation about those ideas at that point. Could be a way to go from here.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect actually, because I was thinking, I was like, yeah, like we have like a decent amount of information, so maybe we can take or maybe have another workshop where we really just think tank it and come up with some like baseline ideas that we can present.
I think it's a cool idea.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so does anyone have any other questions to ask Evan? Okay. Yeah. So Rodney, where do you want to go from here?
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Let's call it for tonight. Thank you so much, Kevin, for coming out. Huge help with this. Great idea. I think, clearly, I think most of us really loved it. Pretty excited to work on it. I think we're like on the T&D side, we're sort of winging this a little bit. So I think we're going to have to sort of maybe regroup and see what might be the best way to kind of move forward. Just because we are working within a pretty tight timeline, we want to start putting fingers to keyboards in just a little over a month. So it doesn't really give us a lot of time to go into a lot of depth with this, but I think we do probably have enough time to come up with like that, maybe like that core sort of few sets of requirements that we want to address and a strategy around how to address it. So we'll probably keep everyone updated here in the FOOBAR text channel. Otherwise, we're having another workshop next week with Jen Champagne, who is actually in the chat with us. Jen will be discussing different programming languages that we can use, and helping guide us on which ones that we should choose. I think probably by about then we may want to have probably like a bit better of an idea of what we want to build, just so that we can make a better decision around what programming languages we do want to use for this. But yeah, that's what's coming up.
That sounds good to me. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for taking on this project. I mean, I think the one thing that's really cool about this is I think when it is done, when you've got something, I actually think we're going to be able to get this into the hands of like many teachers in many classrooms, which could be really cool. So, thanks so much for taking this on. It's really cool of you guys to do that.